and see if
Broadcast is live. It's written. Had a little message. Broadcast is live. Been live for 12 seconds. Everyone can see and hear you.
so you guys are kind of keep awesome. So we're getting started with this wonderful impromptu sort of a question that I raised out on LinkedIn. It says who wants to join, and people sort of pushed our friends. I've known Ben and Denise for a while, and Merv was also pulled into this conversation. So I think this is going to be a pretty sort of a open and an honest and a straightforward talk around what's going on around the world. So I'm really deeply troubled with what is going on. Not only because what's going on right now, I'm seeing different connects, and we'll go through these discussions. I have Merv, Denise, and Ben. Thank you once again for making time. You guys just kind of jumped in and said, "Hey, I want to talk about it," and I said, "Great, awesome," because I'm not a subject matter expert if it's about ethics. So let's have a quick introduction round. Let me start with Merv and then Denise and Ben. Just want to kind of get to know you, so people, maybe the rest of the audience, if they're as and when they come and join, they get to know you guys. So tell me a little bit about yourself and what drives you.
Well, let me start, and thanks, Terry, for organizing this. And although it's short notice, I'm glad to be here. My name is Mary Hickok. I have worked in a couple of Fortune 100 companies for about 20 years, and kind of I did my time and wanted to give back to the community and follow two of my passions about 2.5 years ago. So one is I'm working with an organization in Nevada, in US, in Nevada, on developing learning systems for individuals with disabilities, and the people who support them. And my other passion was AI and ethics, and how to create more awareness and advocate for responsible and ethical AI. So I'm the founder of AIethicist.org, and I do a number of speaking engagements, lectures, training courses, etc. Increase the awareness, increase the knowledge, and have a more elevated space and a wider space for that discussion.
Wonderful, thank you. Denise?
Well, I've been in artificial intelligence basically all my life. And so I write books. I had a company and I worked for large corporations, airlines, Disney, Air France, Swarovski, many corporations, all my life in artificial intelligence. So that's all I've been doing, math and artificial intelligence, and delivering artificial intelligence and speaking about it, writing about it, teaching, all of that. From the background side in our conversation, I was born in Berlin in an army family from a father who was first a Russian Jew who went to the United States, became American, suffered from anti-Semitism in the United States, suffered from pogroms in Russia. My mother was born in Sicily, Catholic Sicilian, who went to France because of the famines in Sicily. Then my father landed in Normandy. He opened the extermination camps. He met my mother. They married. And all of those cultures put together. So I'm basically a Catholic that's insulted by Jews because I'm not Jewish. When I say, why are you going to the synagogue? Then I'm insulted by Catholics because they say, Rothman, you're Jewish, so what are you doing in a church? Then I'm living in France. So for Americans, I'm this sort of like socialist communist thing, living out there, this liberal thing. And then for the French people, I'm this stupid American who's an entrepreneur and wants to do things. So I think discrimination, I have the whole package. I have everything you need in store. And since I'm a bit, like brown in the face, when I go to out in the sun, I become tanned. And in France, they think I'm Arab. So I get an Arab racism being Jewish, American, Italian. So I have the whole package. Anything you want in discrimination, I have it for you in store.
I'm sure you're going to tell us a lot about it as we go into this topic in detail. Just jumping on to our last guest, Ben.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. So I'm Ben Taylor. I'm a white male, and I was raised in a very conservative state in Utah. So I'm coming from maybe one of the most conservative states, and I've had the opportunity to work in the artificial intelligence space for a while. I worked at Intel and Micron. I worked for a hedge fund, but my introduction into ethics came working for a Sequoia Capital company called HireVue, where we built hiring models. And this was 7 years ago. And a year before we built a single model, we knew these models would be racist, sexist, ageist. And why would they be that? It's coming from the human data. So humans have an unconscious bias. Not all of us are bad. Not all of us intend to do this, but we have an unconscious bias. And if that's in the data, AI can mimic it. It can transfer that. And I'm really proud of what our team did there to fight that. So we could actually take a training set that was very, very racist, and we could deploy a model into production, train from that data set that did not transfer that racism. And so for some of that work, I had the opportunity to go and present to the EEOC and review our techniques and review what we were doing. This was 3 or 4 years ago. And so I'm very passionate about this. I've written a few blogs talking about, we have Black Mirror come up and people will fight AI in recruiting. And I've countered that with kind of the human Black Mirror. So if you're going to criticize AI, I'm going to do data analysis. I'm going to show you what people do. And so I've done some articles. I have one called Racism Under Every Rock. I'm showing you from a public data set that this data set is racist. And if this was attached to a company, in the US, they'd be faced with a class action lawsuit.
Wonderful, Ben. So I think it's great when I look at this, this group of wonderful people collectively, decades of experience in their personal lives or devoid of it when growing up in a small town somewhere in the Midwest, or sort of having a full amalgam or chemical amalgam like Denise has. I think so. What we're going to do is we're going to jump straight into, the world is burning. It's impossible for us to, and I'm sitting here in my comfort of home, and there was this wonderful lady. She was commenting just a couple of minutes ago that there's not one Black person in this chat, and I asked her if she could join. So what we're going to try to talk about is, first of all, we are not representing a group. We are that group. That's how I feel about it. Before we get into racism, I just wanted to kind of very quickly to the audience tell a little story, be sharp and sharp and short about it. So we in our house, we have kids. I have Indian background. My wife is Dutch. Our kids are half Dutch, half Indian. And they're moving across Europe, finding love and comfort in the relationship that they're building. And we get to see different cultures, cuisines in our homes. And definitely the discussions around racism or how people feel marginalized in that subtle way. I've seen that at work as well. Let's be very honest. I'm not a bullshitter. I hit the topic straight on the head. When I see discussions where people joke about, well, as the first Chinese person, it's great to have that sort of diversity. So this is not just, diversity is just one person. And first of all, we don't need to identify each other in such manner. But for a lot of people, it is something which happens naturally. When I was a little kid growing up, I was quite shy when I was really young. And to break up that sort of barrier ceiling, I started pretending to be this, tough kid. Started bullying around, and I never realized that it would have impact on people or their lives for a long time. And just last year, when I was in Bangalore, this high school friend of mine who's known me for the last 30 odd years, he reminded me of an incident in which I kind of, pushed him into a corner, and I was trying to sort of impose something on him and making him smoke a cigarette. I guess we were like 16 or 17 back then. And I just walked away. For me, it was just a couple of, minutes of fun, having fun with some young new kid in class. For him, it lasted 3.5 decades. I don't think he's traumatized, but again, this is where I fall into the trap of someone, first of all, forgot. Second, he kind of does not even think, the other has had that impact. And I was reminded of that event in his home. We were sitting, and his wife and his kids are already on the sort of lovely children. And I had totally forgotten it. So I was like, oh my God, I mean, I was such an asshole. But again, when you're a young kid, you just don't know what you're doing, and you tend to forget it. So that was my experience, and I see this throughout a lot of people. There's a lot of pain. So the first question, and I will go through, starting with Merv and Denise and Ben. What I want to actually ask you guys is, so what is it? This fundamentally, we'll go to technology later. This whole idea about how people feel marginalized. It seems like if you watched Hassan Minhaj last Sunday, he spoke about this hierarchy of how we kind of know how you kind of rate each other in terms of where you come from, your ethnicity, and he was pretty spot on. He said, no need to put those black little Instagram blocks into your thing, and you thought you've done your stuff, or paint your logo black for a couple of days, and kind of sugarcoating your understanding. You just don't understand it to be a person constantly being stared at. And I have seen it in trains in Netherlands. It happens as well. And those subtle things in which if you're just looking at someone and moving on, versus you're checking someone out, kind of literally top to bottom, it's something that is happening. So what is the underlying aspect, Merv, on this? It's pretty much deep rooted in humanity. It has always been here. Just quoting, being different is awesome, but being marginalized because you're different is traumatizing, destroying communities. When a person doesn't have a job is one thing, where you have communities who have suffered and managed and created those communities, and they are different communities, not just Black communities. We have even white communities in the Netherlands where people start creating their own ecosystem to survive and coexist. That is really painful to see, that how people are left out of the system. So the straightforward question is, why is it still so deep rooted? And what are the potential underlying reasons why we treat each other in such horrible ways? So I'm basically saying, yes, there is racism. We acknowledge it. That's really bad. It's stupid. And it's just kind of becoming really strong.
To your point, you said you forgot about your incident, but your friend who was on the receiving end of it did not forget about it. When you're on the receiving end of racism or discrimination or this kind of attitudes, or where you're like discriminated in terms of where you live, where you work, in terms of your access to resources, etc., you don't forget about it, and it creates this sense of us versus them to start with. And we talk about unintended consequences a lot in technology and ethics, etc. Then it doesn't feel unintended. We're talking about at least 400 years in the United States, 400 years of discrimination, racism, and the structural injustices and systematic inequalities around this. When you're going through 400 years of stuff, it doesn't feel like unintended. It doesn't feel like it happened overnight. This all comes back to power asymmetry, is what you're asking about, the underlying causes. Power and who's benefiting from it. It's not different in the technology world. It's not different in economy or education, or who's holding office. At the end of it, who is holding the power, what it is helping, and what you do with that. As long as you're not letting go of your power, to create more just, more equal, more fair society, you're going to create this and amplify this structural injustices. And to your point, I mean, in Europe, you feel this more about the refugees. In US, it's different ethnic minorities. I mean, obviously the black community being one, very rightly so. There's a long overdue outcry from the community, or it was a cry that wasn't so out in the open, that it wasn't getting everyone's attention around the world. But it's the migrant communities, the refugees as well. It's all about, at the end of the day, power and who's benefiting from it.
Thank you. I think it does summarize quite well, and I will do that after I've gone with Denise and Ben. I do say Denise, right? I'm trying to say it in that French way to try to be friendly to you, Denise. Is it Denise or Dennis?
That's the pitch. You can say whatever you want.
Awesome. Well,
I've heard about everything. So I would take. I would say, like, I go from Merv and say, and Ben somewhere. I'll put. I would say I was on the receiving side. So I was on the receiving side of everything I told you before. So at one point I had to make a representation of this because I've always done mathematical representations. I'm not so negative. I think that this has been going on for 100,000 years. Human beings have extreme difficulties with cognitive dissonance. It's not only color, it's politics. If you sit down to dinner and someone's on the left, someone's on the right, someone's for this, any difference between a human being and another human being creates a problem because we have this we have very big problem balancing yes and no at the same time in our brain. We can't, it has to be yes or no. It has to be black or white. It has to be left or right. And as soon as you try to do both, it's like in artificial intelligence, we have this softmax, and then you go to one hot, or you have like 5 choices and you have to take one. That's old artificial intelligence. New artificial intelligence, we try to smooth the labels. We say, no, it's not going to be one hot. So that's pretty difficult to sit down for a human being. He needs to classify. So if you take this little representation and now you say we have, let's imagine on this earth, we have 7 billion little vectors. All these little vectors are moving around with their different colors and thoughts. And then they group together because they need to eat, sleep, and all that locally. And all of a sudden, there's this collision. Bam. And this collision can happen at any time. Right now, it's happening because you have 1.5 million Americans that don't have water. They don't have water, access to water, don't have access to electricity and to medical care. So it's like these tectonic plates in an earthquake. It's been going on and bing. But in France, we had this 2 years ago, and it wasn't color. It was people that were having problems filling their gas tank and going to work and eating at the same time. So we had this yellow jacket movement that really rocked France because it was the poor and the rich. And then if you go to other places, it'll be left and right. And this, so it all goes down to rich people don't want you to take their money, but poor people don't want to be poor. It's all these dissonances. But I'm very optimistic. That's where I'm might be a bit different. I think we're improving. I know what I'm saying right now seems a bit crazy, and I'll finish with a little note for Ben about that region, Utah, Arizona, and all that. I have a funny story on that one. It'll be very short. I think in the end, things will improve. Right now, we have this cancel culture going on, bringing statues down. It's a bit excessive, but why not? It's like a tectonic plate, and an earthquake was due. Now you have the city of New York that has like a 5 or 6 million budget for police. They're giving 1 billion to the poor. It's going to be adjusted, and then it's going to go past, and there'll be another crisis, and it'll come back again. And I'll just conclude this little part by saying it started 100,000 years ago. We improved because 100,000 years ago, we ate each other literally. We would kill, I would probably kill one of you and eat you. We don't eat each other anymore. So we're a little better. We're a little better than we were. And it's just a problem. We have all these 6 billion people now. It's a bit more difficult to manage. But I believe in spontaneous order and chaos. This is this mathematician, Henri Poincaré. You have Boltzmann. I believe that in the end, there's spontaneous order. Good people are there. You have Merv, you have Ben, you have Terry. You're right here doing the right thing. So it compensates. So I'll just finish with this little, so I'm optimistic. I think this is a crisis, but if you look at it from in a year, you will see that there are probably, the Black community will obtain things that they didn't obtain before, just like the Yellow Jackets in France obtained things. I'm an optimist, okay?
Great. Okay,
So
all right.
let me just finish with my little story for Ben.
Mhm.
I was in Arizona one day, and I was young. I was delivering cars in the US and all that. And I had this California t-shirt. And I was in Kingston, Arizona. And the guy says, "What the F are you dirty Californians doing here? You're homosexuals and all that stuff." And this is a long
And this was
time
like in
ago.
the 60s or?
Not 70s. And I said, "Hey, I'm from New York." "Ah, the dirty Jews." And and I was thinking, when I'm going to take this t-shirt off and I'm going to put another t-shirt on tomorrow morning, but a Black person can't do that. That is the problem. We people can hide. I can pretend I'm not Jewish background. I can pretend I'm not Catholic background. But when you're Black, you can't take your t-shirt off. So that's a problem that needs to be addressed. I mean, we can all hide behind something else, but a Black person's Black. So I took my t-shirt on, and the next day everything was fine. And I was thinking, gee, if I was Black, what would happen here?
Oh, so thank you. I think, Denise, that's really
So it wasn't Utah, Ben, it was Arizona.
Arizona.
Oh, that's good.
Close enough. Close enough.
So
So Ben, just kind of reiterate the question: why is it happening? Is it so deep rooted, or are there other causes that is driving us totally crazy?
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic, and I think it's important for us to really look at what is a human. And I think I love the transition coming from you, Dennis, because what makes us us? We're very emotional creatures. We stereotype. We have these types of behaviors. We overreact, and so kind of backing up, humans are products of our genetics and our environment. And for this discussion, we're just talking about the environment. So my environment, I was raised in conservative Utah. My dad was a doctor and my mom was a lawyer, and I went to a private school. And now you compare that with some other people I've interacted with where their mom was homeless and single when they were born, and she was on drugs. And then you look at, well, what's the opportunity out of the gate? And I think sometimes coming from the conservative perspective, and my opinion has since changed, but I understand the conservative viewpoint. The conservative viewpoint is there is not a problem. The conservative viewpoint is we are not racist, and this is overreacted. And the thing that I think is very interesting, and I would give this argument for both sides, there is so much. Okay, so I've called out the issue with humans. The vulnerabilities, we're emotional creatures, we stereotype, but this is the saving grace. This is the opportunity. Humans also have empathy. And so a local engineer here in Utah, when this started kind of coming up again recently, he wrote a blog post about what it's like to be raised Black in Utah. And if you talk to a white conservative in Utah, they would say Utah's not racist. He writes this blog post, and it is very upsetting. Is the racism extreme? No. Is the racism constant? Yes. And just minor things, which you hit on, Terry, just, running at night through a neighborhood, he can't do it because someone will call the cops on him. And he's had these experiences. And so as soon as you hear that story and you have empathy, so I think that the best thing that we can do is be very, very open in public. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing your story and your experience, because some of these minorities don't feel comfortable sharing their stories, share it with someone who can. And I think the more we can share these stories and experiences, that can help fight the stereotypes. And so when you are tempted to call the police because there's a Black man running through the neighborhood at night, you can kind of check yourself and think, why am I doing this? Where are these stereotypes coming from?
Thank you. Okay, so I think this is a huge topic, and hundreds of years of, if 100,000 of years of, if we believe, and we'd love to believe, Denise, where we've sort of always felt the difference, known the difference, and now we are acting out on that difference, and probably reacting to the acting out of the difference, which happened to George Floyd and a bunch of other people, and it happens on a daily basis. The second topic is this. So this is a beautiful book written by Thomas Piketty. It's 1,000 pages thick. And Thomas Piketty's first book on capitalism was very successful. He's been giving talks in New York. And I bought this book because obviously I want to deconstruct this. If some of you obviously know history, back in the days, when I say back in the days, probably a few thousand years ago, where the King Musa in that sort of city of the country, Mali, was the richest man on the planet.
In Timbuktu.
Timbuktu was the capital, indeed, of Mali, and that was the richest person. There was slave trade happening back then as well. And now we're actually seeing that, capital and ideology, he calls it, but I'm thinking, so it's basically just the capital, as Mer also quite rightly said. It's just, wallet share is shifted in a different direction. And the economic inequality is not making things any easier. When you see a young white kid, he was breaking a glass. I think I saw in one of the YouTube videos, there are a couple of, kids, they pulled them off. This is, why? There's a lot of anger in humanity as such. If you look at the database, it's called WIDS something, which Piketty uses as a reference. It's a beautiful book, actually. So question, Mer. The economic inequality further deepens this divide, and it is really true. If I haven't come from slavery, but if I feel enslaved with the limited paycheck that I have, then I cannot do anything. And this applies to actually just about everybody. It really starts breaking things and deconstructing things, as Peter Schumpeter said a long time ago. But it's actually creating this wealth, moving into this, big, amount of Babel, where just a handful of guys are accumulating this huge wealth. And this economic inequality, since the deregulation of the economy, in the Reagan's era back in the early 80s, is actually just increasing. How do we tackle this? Because it's almost like a double whammy. There's this race issue. Economic inequality is tearing us apart. Let's be very honest. We're in the midst of a crisis. I don't know what's going to happen to a lot of companies. Companies are announcing restructuring plans. It means more, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people moving not directly into poverty, but moving from doing better off middle class to less better off middle class. This is how the Rust Belt states in the US actually got deconstructed. So if it starts spreading at this level, I'm really scared. I mean, what do we look at? Are we going to go back to eating each other, as Denny said? So it's like 100,000 years, we're back to square one. And how does this economic inequality, how can we stop this?
Merv, your mic, put your mic on.
You're
Merv.
muted.
Your mic, okay. Now we can hear you.
I don't realize Terry unmuted me. I just want to go back before, when I start, I want to go back to the racist issue, because it's not like one silo of, okay, this is about racism, this is about economic, structural issues or economic inequalities, the intersection of this stuff. So, and you're talking about in US, when you're talking about racism and what did that to the community, we're talking about the story starts at 1619 here, 400 years ago, where the Black community in the US did not, for at least 350 years of that, until civil rights and some of the rights in the late 60s, did not have any representation. They didn't have any right to life, to liberty, to accumulate wealth. Pretty much every single dime that we're making in terms of their labor was going back to the slave owners. What little they had during the Reconstruction era was ripped back from them. This country lived through Jim Crow era. This country lived through redlining of housing policies in the 1930s. And when you're looking at some of the, going back to technology and AI and some of the models, you're seeing that amplified, and those neighborhoods and those areas and people living in those still being marginalized because of those structural injustices that has been going on for decades and decades and decades of discrimination and equality, economic and racial inequality, at least in the US. But going back to what else is happening, we're looking at privatization of public services here. You're looking at data colonialism. Like, these are the stuff that we need to also discuss. When you're talking about data sets involving people, we're talking about subjects and objects, right? Someone is the object, someone is the data collector, collecting information and data about an object, or subject, and making money out of this, making profit out of this. And with information on, like, knowledge on AI technologies, and these technologies, holders of this data, like you said, the society is splitting further and further, being more marginalized in terms of haves and have-nots. What you're doing is you're having this private sector, whether it's big tech companies or data brokers or companies who can afford to get their hands on this data and use that for their own benefit, kind of increasing that embedding those discriminative forces and inequality in their practices as well. We talk about big tech companies or other big multinationals, and shareholder capitalism versus stakeholder capitalism. Who are you serving at the end of the day? And when you're talking about giving back to the community or trying to help economic inequality as your corporate social responsibility, why don't we pay taxes here first, and why don't we take care of the communities around our headquarters, instead of getting subsidies from the states where our warehouses and headquarters are going to be built next, using taxpayers' money in those states. Why don't we actually give back to the community?
Wonderful. Thank you. Let me just put you on the mute again. I think it was an echo. It's interesting, actually. I'm seeing some comments, and I have a beautiful paragraph from this book, and I want to read that later. I will not read that because some comments are not so friendly, or at least I'll just say straightforward, they're not informed. But let's go to Denise. And Denise, what do you think about this? Economic inequality is increasing. That's the rationale. And it's been continuing to increase.
Okay, I'm beginning. It's very interesting. I'm going back to Murray and Ben and all this, put it together. I think we shouldn't. All four of us are living in 2020, so we're obviously influenced locally by the year we're living in. So, but I don't think we have to worry that much, because I'm going back to these tectonic plates. Human beings don't react very quickly. I mean, they just go on and on and on until they hit a wall, and then they adapt. And I think that, let's put it this way. You have the Game of Thrones. And I remember that one of my favorite scenes in the Game of Thrones is this person coming up like us four with knowledge and saying, I know something, Queen. And with that knowledge, I'm going to take the power. And the Queen answers, arrest this guy. Power is power. And I don't care. So I think that we have these very powerful corporations in the world. We have these very rich people in the world. And all these people are nice people, okay, that just take all the money and they do exactly what Murphy said. But it's not only that. For example, in you're going back to the States, it started actually in 1607 in Jamestown with indentured whites, indentured servants coming from England. And in 1620, there were no black people on those boats. We're talking about indentured servants in that time. And we would force prostitutes and people. And then in California, you have thousands of white people that are homeless. So poverty is, so we can't look at this locally. What I'm saying is there's something called the American Revolution. Okay, that's 1776. We tore everything apart. Okay, as an American, we just said that's enough with this king and his abuses. We tore it apart. I'm French too. So in 1789, they chopped the king's head off. They said that's enough with it. Okay, then you have, we're talking about black, there was a civil war. Okay, there was a civil war. People died. So I think that problems are solved. We solve them, but we don't know how to solve them peacefully. That's going back to what Ben said about emotions and all that. We don't know how to do that. We're hardwired to be just yes or no. So at one point you get revolutions. You had the Russian Revolution, you have revolutions, you have revolts. What's happening in the United States is a little revolution. And it's going to correct things because it's long due, maybe 50 years. So Terry, I'm not worried. When the population has enough, it just tears everything down. They tore everything down here in France for months. And now, right, they just painted a statue right in front of the parliament this morning. And in England, they painted Churchill's statue, so you had to put it in the encasing. People react. So I'm not that worried. If one day someone feels that Amazon or the people you're mentioning or Google, they're just going to go burn that building down. Humans are not lambs. So I'm not scared at all. I'm not even scared by revolts or protests. In France, it's a national sport. As soon as someone doesn't agree, everyone goes on strike and breaks everything down. And then the government and the companies. So I believe that humanity corrects things and we get this civilization where we haven't killed 50 million people in Europe for the past, 70 years. That's the first time in 1,000 years we haven't killed each other. You know, if we were just like 70 years ago, we'd be shooting at each other. You know, there'd be this war and maybe we haven't blown up 50 million people yet, and we could. So I think there is progress. And what you're saying is true. But the blacks in the United States are correcting this right now. They're tearing everything apart. And they're saying, this is the last time I'm giving this last warning. And people are listening. They're trying to correct. And same for economics. You don't need Piketty. You need picket strikes. You need pickets. So people
bring down the picket fences. Yeah.
I believe in people. I believe in humanity. And when they're not satisfied, there's revolutions and they tear everything down. And you have revolts. In England, they chopped Charles I's head off, and it started a constitutional monarchy. There are no more monarchies that are strong in the world. So, yes, the modern kings are the guys trying to go to the moon and mine the moon. They're going to mine the moon. So once, you know what's going to happen? I can tell you. Just everyone write this down. They're going to go to the moon, and they're going to start mining. And one of these days, one of their little stations, people are going to begin to fight up there. There's going to be a guy that's going out with the other guy's girl. He's going to kill someone. There'll be no police. The guy's going to go on strike because he doesn't have enough money. There's going to be a virus. The guy's going to go up with COVID and spread it all over. I don't believe everything they think is going to happen. I believe that humans compensate, but in very tough ways. They wait a long time, but then and we all talk, look, there's this cancel culture. We canceled Hitler from everywhere. In Europe, you can't, there are no books, no pictures. You can't, there's no Hitler Street, there's no Adolf, but everyone talks about him. So the cancel culture doesn't work, but at the same time, no one wants to start that over again. So I'm not optimist, I'm realist. I think that humans correct things, even in Utah. And Utah, by the way, is a beautiful place. And things have changed over the years. It's not like it was. You're too young to know that, but I was down there in the 70s, and there's been tremendous progress. It's tremendous.
Cool. So increasing. Thank you, Denise. In terms of the economic inequality and the constant sort of the gap that is rising. You'd be living under a rock if you were just purely looking at the stock markets, or even listening to Berkshire and Hathaway that have shown sort of the stock sort of appreciation and the benefit that is brought to to the world is a hockey stick. And I'm looking at a hockey stick, sort of two hockey sticks, kind of sort of and the angle between these two hockey sticks is increasing. It's getting too obtuse. So what do you think is what can we do to stop this economic inequality that is increasing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So a very short story that you'll relate to, Terry, doing a startup is our startup, we joined Data Robot, but before that we had to raise a bridge. And so I think within a month or two, we raised $200,000 on a bridge. And I was having a conversation with a Black female who was also doing a startup. And I casually mentioned that we raised a bridge from family and friends. And she mentioned, what family and friends could possibly raise a bridge like that for me? And what that brings up is she's exactly right. So where did that money come from? It came from white executives that were in our network that we were friendly with. And I don't know the reference of this. Someone told me this once, that your income or your net worth is the average of 5 of your closest friends. Or like, that's not a hard science. That's kind of a silly metric, but it's a true comparison. So if I look at an individual, so going back to that story, assume that our startups were competitive and I can go raise a $200,000 bridge to save my mistakes, and you can't. And let's say we're totally equal. Your startup will fail and mine will continue. Mine will continue on to the next event. And that definitely seems very unfair. So I think one way to fix that from society's perspective is anything you can do to try to reach out, mentor, and support individuals. And there are formal programs. This isn't just a feel-good statement. Feel good, try to mentor people who have are negatively, and they don't have the same economic opportunities as you do. Try to be there as a mentor, an advocate, a resource. But there are groups in the US where you can pay money to, and they will take some of the inner city kids in Chicago who are raised in a very toxic environment with high crime, and they will actually put them through this boot camp and get them into college. And they have some great outcomes from that. So you have to do something. And
Okay.
can't wait for the government to just fix it.
That's a nice story.
Wonderful. I think it kind of resonates to a lot of people, and I see there are some people going on there. There are 2 people, and I don't think they deserve the because first of all, they're not even asking an intelligent question here in the comments, but they're not. It's a self-aggrandizing, kind of just basically just pushing their own, and it saddens me to see this because.
Why does it sadden you?
It saddens me because people just have not sort of educated themselves about how it works. So basically what they're saying is, and there's this lady and there's this gentleman having a nice dialogue with each other. I'm not even sure. I don't think that they've already kind of written us off. Like, these guys are, playing sweet. And so the thing is, the narrative, and I'm reading it, but I believe in this, is basically, the thing is, you have access to property, your access to entrepreneurship, access to free markets. That's what these guys are kind of talking about. Well, you can be anyone from anywhere, and those kind of statements, and you should be able to do that. If a person has been deconstructed for a long time, and I just spoke about this friend of mine, who probably went through some experiences. Mine was just a small, unfortunate contribution to him feeling inferior by me just pushing down his throat and saying, you smoke a cigarette. But people going through this, sense of defeat all the time, pitching to investors if you're, for, let's say, people with different color standing up and trying to.
Yeah, but their point of view is interesting to understand.
It is interesting, but it is
to understand what they're saying.
Absolutely.
They're saying if you really want to do it, you can do it wherever you come from. Like, we hear this in France, because everything's free in France. You can go to college free. You have free Medicare. You go to a library free. You can do everything is free. So we have this exactly what you said. Many people say, "Gee, they live in these poor places," just like Ben said, with an average income, but everything is free. They can go to college. Why don't they make an effort and do that? And I think it's important we answer that question, is that you're broken. And the image I give, because I hear this all the time, is, okay, we're going to go to the Olympics and you're going to run a 100-meter dash, but I'm going to cut one of your legs off. So now you're going to beat the world record with one leg. It's the same thing, but since it's not visible, it's like what I said, if black is visible, if you're broken mentally, it's as if someone cut your leg off. So if you're born in that family Ben is describing, and I mean, your stories are very touching. I think I'm going to remember all your stories all my life now. I'm going to have a bad evening. so this homeless mother, you have a homeless mother, and you have no father, and you have no mother, and she's taking drugs, and you're broken. And then all of a sudden someone comes up when you're 18 and says, "Hey, you know what? You can go in France college, it's free." But the guy's broken. He needs psychological help. He needs people like Burvey with ethics and all that. He needs help. And if you don't help him psychologically, you're going to get nowhere. And I would say something else. If you don't help them emotionally, because we're all talking about intelligence, money, but you have to love these people. You have to say, you're like me, you can do things. You have to give them trust. It's not only about funding. It's about, we did this with my wife. We have a corporate company all our lives. We would always do pro bono teaching. And you just teach this person that he's something. It's all about dignity. That's one word we haven't mentioned yet, is dignity. A human being that has no dignity can go nowhere. And if he doesn't feel that you're respecting his dignity, he's going to tear the whole society. Dignity, that's the key word. So you have to go see these people. The people that you're talking here on LinkedIn, they have a good point, because they're saying, well, if all that's free in France, why don't they succeed? It's because their dignity has been bashed, like Murphy was saying, for decades, for generations. So I have a good story about that, a very short one. I had a fight in my family, which nice people. I mean, I wouldn't say they're racist. They're saying black people can't swim. I say, black people can't swim. Are you crazy? What are you, dumb or something? That you have Olympic, and we got in this fight all evening. And then I talked to my son, happened to be going out with a black girl, and I said, "Hey, you know what? Someone said black people can't swim," and she said, "That's true." I said, "Well, you're crazy too." It's just it's been bashed in their minds. You can't do it. So if you take it, there's not many black swimmers in the United States, people that swim, because they don't have access to swimming pools. They don't have access to ocean. So we've bashed people down, like Murphy was saying. So we have to give them dignity back. So the answer to the people on LinkedIn that's saying that, if someone's destroyed you, it's like raped. You've been raped for generations. Your dignity's been raped for generations. Right. You can't do anything.
Yeah. Okay. I think yes, and probably you hit and that should answer. And I think Diane and Charles, I see you guys are pretty excited and sharing, and I do appreciate your comments. Don't misunderstand me. I understand what people feel. There's this whole sort of dilly-dallying of, oh, the whiners, now everybody wants to get special attention. There was this incident, and this happens on a daily basis. You guys have to pay attention. If you're not in that neighborhood, if you haven't seen this happening, I'll tell you, when kids standing in school, there's a dark-skinned kid standing, and he's just kind of, when you're a little kid, you have no idea that the world is segregated and different and compartmentalized. When you experience someone telling you, I don't talk to black people, just get out of here. People have said that in that matter-of-factly, and that person does not have to have any ethnicity, sort of forget about, it's just one person. And I've heard people say that, and it's happened to people. Many people feel this way, but it's been happening. And this would happen in a classroom with 50, 60 students. No one stood up and said anything. I would go sort of crazy. If I would go ballistic, if it happened in front of me. But I think dignity is not something you're being given. You just get. You have to sort of provide sort of support and comfort to each other. And I think let's leave it to that. It's a very sort of. I know we're not going to be able to find answers to this here in this talk. I want to jump on to the next topic. Because so we were all technologists. Mar, you're focusing on AI ethics, which is a huge and an important topic in Europe for us. And I think if you look at California state, at least they've banned sort of face recognition technologies. They're really understanding things and looking at things differently. But I do have concerns around the use of AI. For instance, I don't know if you guys are aware, just about 7 to 15% of the data sets that accumulate data, even in research, has, just talking about diversity, in this case, we're just talking about data from women, it's just 7 to 10%. So the representation of data, with women as, being in sampled data sets is really low. And there was some other discussion. I think there was a discussion on Twitter where some researcher was pointing out to something in Jan LeCun. He pointed out quite rightly. He said, well, this data set has just been trained on people with Caucasian background. And if you took up a data set for people from Africa, that would perform very well with the demographic. So the data sets are not distributed well. They are not balanced. Will we ever have a sort of an ethical AI, explainable, understandable AI that'll sort of help reduce these? I mean, can we solve these problems by bringing more diversity into the AI in our machine learning and deep learning data sets and the algorithms that we're going to develop? Or is it going to, again, sort of throw us apart even further?
I think that reducing the problem of ethics or bias to the data set is reducing the problem to just one thing and not looking at the other conditions around that. Obviously, data set and bias in data set is one of the underlying things, and how you collect that, how you curate that, how you process that. But a lot of the times, so this starts at the data collection side, where you don't know or you don't care about the context or history of that data and who's included, who is not included. But also, it doesn't stop there. It's so, you have to ask the questions of what kind of problems am I trying to solve here? What does success looks like, and what does that success or outcome with my model or with my software is going to benefit to? It's like, who's benefiting from these models or predictions or classifications that I'm coming out with? So it's not the data issue. It's all the subjective decisions that goes into the models that you build, the outcomes or the success criteria that you build, who's in your team, and like what is the incentive within those within the company that is producing it, within the end users or implementers or operators that are using it. And at the end, I always come back to, it's like, the saying, follow the money and follow the power. So at the end of the day, who is this benefiting to, and what kind of things are we predicting with the softwares? It's like when you're looking at someone's online profile, we're making inferences about them and their network and their credibility, reliability, hireability, morality. At the end, we're making judgments or inferences of what we see on online behavior and what kind of data we get about their worth. We're talking about human worth. I think that's where it stops. We're trying to make these predictions on group level. You're not giving the person the benefit of doubt. You're not giving, treating people as stationary, static. People grow, people get better, people make mistakes, and they do things to improve those. We're not looking at those. So you're just taking, okay, you've said this online, and you've clicked this, and you've searched for this, and in the interviews you said this or whatever, you posted this online, and I'm going to make an inference about you and your character. Oh, by the way, you also belong to this network of these people. You're connected to this 100 people, whether it's your neighborhood, your family, the zip code that you're living in, the people in your social network. I'm going to make an inference about you. I think that using the technology to predict or assess people in terms of worth at the end of the day is what the issue is for me.
Hang on. Yeah. So what you're saying is it's basically that net individual / net collective worth of individual. And because there's more capital, there's cash, and there's business to be done with the behavioral data that in one part of the demographic region, even in this case, males versus females, points us to start enriching data sets that are more inclined for us to constantly mine those data sets versus sort of bring more diversity, because it makes no sense. Is that what you're saying, right?
Data set is not the only problem. Data set collection, processing is one thing, but the rest of the process of how you build your models, how you incentivize, who's involved in those decision-making systems, who's benefiting from it, the whole thing is needs to be reviewed. And sometimes there are areas where we just shouldn't have AI. We just
Yep, I understand. I think so. A governance structure, transparent governance structure that understands this whole ML pipeline, if you will, or the whole ML ops, let's say, value chain, can probably help some companies. And yes, I totally agree with you. You just cannot keep banging the nail onto every problem. Thank you. Denise, what do you think about this AI? And do you think AI is going to can help us, bring more? Because it's a lovely technology, right? So let me just kind of rephrase this question. Hey, listen, 25 years ago, if I was pitching AI to the rest of the humanity, I'm standing on top of this huge hill, and probably you definitely root for me, Dennis, because you've always done that in the last 2.5 years. And I'll say, guys,
35, 40 years.
Yeah. Exactly. And I'm standing up here and saying internet came and made a lot of people wealthy and prosperous. AI economy is going to bring a lot of prosperity to this humanity. And I'm standing up here, and then, as Mer rightly says, well, we're not sure if it's going to happen, and it might further marginalize people. Do you think it's the right thing to say that AI can solve these problems and bring more prosperity into society?
No, I wouldn't say that. So I definitely wouldn't say that. But I have another. I like global views. So I would divide this into 3 parts: social networks, which Murphy expressed very well, with the environment. You just can't look at it. That's what I called open data sets. Okay, these social networks. Then Ben has this expertise on closed data sets, like working for corporations, which I've done. You clean up the database, you take the discrimination out, or you get a lawsuit. Those are closed databases. So you have the closed, open, and closed. Closed are already clean because there are many laws. Now I would like, since I can't say more than Murphy would say about environment, social networks, and I can't say more than Ben is going to say about how he cleans up data sets and his ethics. I'm going to give you another view, which I think we should be watching out for, is always watch out for the invisible enemy. And for once, I won't be so optimistic. So we're not talking on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. No one's talking about what's going on in the military with artificial intelligence. I mean, it's a non-subject. If you ever say something this on LinkedIn, well, no one, you get 1 like or 1 comment. No one's interested. But the Russians now have missiles that can go 20,000 kilometers an hour. Okay, so they can hit a target around on the other side of the world. In they can blow up anything. And you have these smart bombs, and you have smart drones, and artificial intelligence is huge, that we're talking about billions invested in smart weapons. No one's talking about it. We're breaking statues down. We're painting Churchill. So the invisible part is that. And then you have another aspect, what I would compare Google plus Amazon plus Facebook. I would compare them to the Chinese government. I'm sorry if I'm going to hurt anyone. I don't see a difference between capitalistic domination and state domination when it comes to controlling everything in your life, like Murray was describing. And this is very invisible and silent. So I think at one point, that's where I'm a bit, I'll be optimistic, and then I'll give you a little real nice pessimistic. They're going to control everything. They're going to know where we're going, what we're doing. It's 1984. It's even worse than Orwell. It's a nightmare. Okay. But then there's this beautiful thing. I would like to be nice with people because we're reaching the hour level. I'm very pessimistic about that. But at the same time, in a few minutes, I'm going to turn this off. And I've invited my neighbors to come over. I'm going to shut everything down here. And we're going to be drinking this nice French wine with no internet, no nothing. And we're going to be laughing, eating cakes at a good social distance, physical distance. And the heck with internet and the heck with AI. So at one point, no one can. You can turn your laptop off. My favorite expressions is we're either monkeys with machine guns. That's the secret part, or monkeys with laptops. But we can be monkeys with bananas and peanuts. That's what I'm going to be in a few minutes. So
I think it's really beautiful. I think laying on a balance and not getting hyper sort of excited about the pros or hyper super depressed about the cons of technology probably helps you stay sane, and that's definitely great advice. Ben, what do you think about AI? Do you think it's gonna further divide humanity? It's a Manhattan Project. We're pushing everything under the carpet, as Denise says. And we'll get back to a couple of questions, guys. I know Russell, I see you guys posting questions. We'll answer these questions as well. So quick, like 2-3 minutes, Ben.
Well, so what Dennis mentioned is a whole topic. So maybe about the autonomous war, and that's a very engaging topic. With AI ethics, sometimes we get the opinions, maybe coming more from the academic community, that AI ethics is this impossible goal. It's something that is so confusing, so challenging, we won't actually get there. And I find that view very frustrating and naive, where in the US, if you can take care of sexism, racism against Blacks and Hispanics, you've taken care of 90% of the problem. And there are very straightforward ways to do that have been around for 7 or 8, 9 years. And so for all these bad examples you see in the media, this happened, this happened, every single one of those examples is reactive. It wasn't proactive. They didn't think about this could happen. They didn't think about the sexist resume model. They didn't think about the racist gender model. And so if you are proactive, you can take care of, think of it as a pie. You can take care of 90%. So I'm optimistic. You can offer value immediately if you understand how to do it. Will you fix the long tail? Never. The long tail will never get there. Beauty bias, we could talk a long time about all the biases that exist. We'll never get to the end, but we can fix the majority.
Thank you, Ben. I think it is an engaging topic. Each individual topics, if you go into AI ethics, weaponization, etc., are massive topics. So what we're going to try to do is I'll break up the questions and give each one of you a question. And I'd want Russell's question, if Mur, can you take this question, give a very quick answer to what Russell is asking. You can read this, right? I just put it on the screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
Can you see it, Murphy? We can read it to you.
No, I can.
Okay. So I can read it for you. If having a mandate and intention to be as ethical as possible, including being vigilant for unconscious bias, one would hope the model would be more ethical at origin.
I think that when we're talking about ethics, it's not fixing one thing. It's not fixing the model. It's not fixing, like I'm repeating myself a bit, but it's not fixing the data set. It's not fixing one thing, or like after you build everything, you come in and, oh, I'm going to make this more ethical. It's every single decision that you're making. It's the culture of your company. It's every single decision that you're making. It's not, I always say ethics is not a plug and play. You can't just like plug it at some point into the model or into the data set and make it ethical. Every single decision within the process, within the development, product development, implementation, and monitoring and feedback, those feedback loops, every single decision in that is subjective. And yes, if you are coming in with a position of, okay, I'm going to make this model and my software or my product as ethical as possible, there is hundreds of things that you can do with the checklist, with the process, with your team, etc. But there will never become a point where, okay, I'm like perfectly unbiased, debiased my product. It's perfectly ethical. We're not going to come to that stage ever, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with the human data if you're using the product with the humans. So that would be my two cents around that. It's the intention is great, the culture, that principle of being ethical, that's where it starts, and you have to apply it to every single thing, not only the model or the data set, and then you get to a point where it's like as good as possible, intentionally, but just like not reduce it to one thing along the life cycle.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm not going to go into the cognition and the neuroscience aspects. It's almost like we're trying to box, a human brain into a system and expect it to be ethical. But this, thank you for this explanation. I think yes, it's gonna take a while before we have, just and reliable and trustworthy, let's say, systems. But thanks. Let me just go to the next question. This, I guess, maybe I'll let Denise, you can answer this.
What's crowd theory?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that either.
Yeah. I don't know what cloud theory means. I'm sorry, but I'm an honest person. I'm an honest person, so I don't know what crowd theory means. If you can tell me, Russ, maybe Russ can reformulate. Let's see. We can get for
intelligence, I guess. I think. I don't know.
Crowd theory may additionally alert effect with the fear of being superficial. Well, anyway, if I take what I understand, there's the fear of being excluded in the superficial elite. Well, that's what we've been talking about. Well, we all have that fear. Everyone is lower than someone else. Even Elon Musk is not as rich as Jeff Bezos. So at any point, you're always part. So the fear is in fact, that's an interesting concept. Dignity is a big one, but fear is what really drives any human being. Fear is enormous. I mean, and I think there's nothing we can do about it because we're prehistoric people in a modern world. I would say monkeys with machine guns, but I think it went too fast. We went from prehistoric life to Neolithic life much too fast. It's going too fast. We went from being hunters to people living in villages, and we're not good at it yet. And it's only 12,000 years. We spent maybe millions of years trying to live in a house, and all of a sudden, no, it's only 12,000 years. I think it's going to take maybe another 100,000 years before humans evolve into something better. It's not going to be like next year or 10 years or 50 years. Remember, we had to survive by killing. We had to survive by discrimination. And if we didn't, we would die. All of a sudden, we're in this world. It's going too fast. I would like to say something. I talk to racists. I have racists that don't like a Jewish background. They hate Jews. But I'll talk to them. I'll have a glass of wine with them, and I'll find something we can talk about. Because if I'm not going to talk about, with my background, to all the people that discriminated through all my origins, I'm not going to talk to anyone. I can't read a book. I can't talk to anyone. So I think that we should talk to racists, and we should drink a beer with them, and we should say, you know what, some people don't like you because of the way you are. They say, well, I'm not a racist. Ben said that most people that are racist don't say I'm not a racist. Talk to them. I think my message would be talk to everybody, love everybody, and then go talk to them. Even that policeman that is a redneck in Kingston I met, well, I talk to him. I say I live in France, and people are, talk to everyone, be open, empathetic. Like Ben said, empathy.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, and it takes courage to accept your vulnerabilities and step onto the other side. So I think it's great. The only way we can sort of bridge these differences is to kind of, despite knowing and understanding the differences. And I've seen this as well. I was born a Hindu. I've converted to Christianity 20 years ago. I'm a devout Christian. My sister is, she's born Hindu as well. She's married into a Muslim family, beautiful family. It's wonderful. And we still have differences, and you can still have fun with each other as long as you understand that. I've seen as well at the border, especially when you're in Jerusalem, and me and my son, he turned 18, and I promised him that we were going to visit the holy sites, etc. And it was a beautiful mix of both cultures coexisting, and there's a lot of people don't know much, and that's what I meant. There's a lot of miseducation, lack of education, understanding in terms of there are 1.5 million Arabs in Israel. There are Israelis. People don't know much about things. But I think the only thing my advice is travel a lot, sit down on the ground, break the bread together, different cultures. That is the only way we can come together. Probably, Dennis, you're right. Maybe that's why we are obsessed about aliens. Every alien movie that you see, they come down. The first thing you notice in every movie is they don't talk much with each other. They seem to have this telepathic, they move slowly. And probably that is that 100,000 years of evolution they've already undergone. So it could be, I would love to get on an intergalactic rocket ship and find myself there, but I'll probably be slaughtered because I'll talk too much. But those guys are so, any alien movie, they're so awesome, except the Predators, even they're very friendly to each other, but so there's a question for Ben, and probably let's keep this a last question, and then we can sort of wrap it up together.
Okay, so I'd like to think that one of the issues is that we measure the economic success incorrectly on a macro level, therefore focus on promoting policies that inherently promote inequality. Yeah, I think there's definitely some issues where we make decisions that don't help the localized inequalities. Like we incentivize welfare systems and other things that potentially increase the number of families that do have a single mother, or we can do some things that are very backwards. Where I think the best thing I've seen that I've been really excited about was this group that they will take kids where their local school systems have failed them, because that's always the hope, is can we figure out a way that the poor neighborhoods can have better schools, but where are those teachers coming from? Where are the teachers commuting from? Well, they're going to commute from the poor neighborhoods. So what does that do to the quality? Or if there's increased crime, what does that do to the quality? And so I think having these programs outside of that, where people can invest more money into it, and this gets back to the network concept. How can I network those individuals with the networks that we have? How can I network them in where they have mentors and people they'd never have access to? And then later in their life, they don't have to say, what would I do for a friends and family round? Like how sad is that statement? But how great would that statement be where it's, oh, I did it too. I did the same thing you did just in time. It was fantastic. And so how can we build those networks? And I think listening to this, I'm a huge storytelling fan. I think empathy and listening to people, communicating what Dennis was saying, talk to everyone, listen to everyone, tell your stories. That's the best way for people to go from hate to love.
I totally agree. I think that couldn't have been a better word said. Um, I think none of us are clean, and I have my own demons, and I think I've kind of washed most of them. I've sort of learned a little bit, and I wish if we can kind of spread this beautiful word of conversation, have a lot of conversation, walk over to that group of young men, and sort of making a ruckus, and you're already judging them by thinking this guy is probably gonna snatch and grab my purse, and as you approach them, you realize they are you and you're them. All this kind of really interesting experiences makes life rich, and I think that is what we should focus on. I guess if I can summarize for all of you guys, I think the three things: racism is super bad. I think uh, if you can kind of sort of start looking into the inner person and have this conversation, you'll realize there's so much people will open up to, including Diane. I read your sort of message. You mentioned, yes, it could be also reverse. A lot of people also don't want to talk to you. I know you shared something really interesting. I really appreciate that. So I think there's a lot of, we seem to be kind of, molecules as human beings, but essentially we belong to this one ecosystem. And I definitely think that is going to help us all get through this. Hopefully with we can bring some economic equality into this, or at least come closer to bridge that gap. And technology, we love technology. I mean, Dennis, you've written a book. Ben, right now you're part of a new company. It's a much bigger outfit, I believe, and it's fun. And we're doing some awesome stuff as well, and more. I think ethics, as you know, in Europe at least, is huge. So you're sitting in Michigan. I wonder how. If I think of Michigan, I only think of that '70s show, Kelso, and I don't know if you know those. It's a lovely sort of sitcom show with young people growing up in really the border of Canada, and Point Place is the name of that place in that '70s show. So I think we have a lot to learn. Maybe I'll still ask you guys to give final thoughts. So Marv, Denise, and Ben, starting with you, Marv, and then we'll shut it down with Ben.
I just want to touch on a couple of things that Denise and Ben mentioned, to kind of touch on their questions. What the incentives, the last question that was asked, we measure success, at the current reality around the world and in the corporate world is that we measure success by GDPR, amount of production, and what is your stock value, stock price, your market capitalization. We are not looking at what a country, what is happening, the level of education, the quality of education, the quality of healthcare system, the happiness of people, the access to resources. Those are more, those are the stuff that make more impact on people's lives, and the stuff that would help us to, work towards a more equal and fair, equitable and fair society, not just increasing the production and the profit and the value for your shareholders. The other thing I want to mention just before we close is what Dennis mentioned about closed data sets, and those are being reviewed and clean. That's one of the stuff that are in every single ethical AI, responsible AI principle and guidelines and governance. This focus on and the need for explainability, transparency, and fairness. The whole reason we're talking about this is the closed data sets, or like private proprietary trade secret data sets, are not always used for best intentions or clean or explainable or used for the good of the end people impacted at the end. So I would be very cautious around that statement. But yeah, just to close up, I would like to be as optimistic as my co-panelists. But I think, I mean, I believe in humanity. I believe in the ultimate good of humanity and the good that people do, and eventually we'll get there, but just need to work hard towards it.
Thank you, Mer. Denise?
Well, I'd like to focus just on one concept because Merv and Ben expressed themselves so well. I'm just going to focus on one concept. We've been talking about hate for an hour, but there's something fantastic about human beings that are very different from animals. We have love. We have this fantastic thing called love. I mean, it's very difficult for a cat to love you. He likes you, but if you die, the cat will eat you. Everyone knows that in police stories. So your cat will eat you if you die. We bury our people. I think love, when humans began to bury stop eating, we stopped eating each other maybe 20 or 30,000 years ago. We began to bury people. We have love. And I think that is the most fantastic weapon on earth against hate. I mean, is love. So technology, forget technology. Go drink a beer or with anybody. If the guy is suffering like Ben, and really you touch me with your stories, they're going to be haunting me. But I also talk to racists. I mean, people, I remember being in Tunisia with people, a guy that hated Jews. And he said, Rothman, you're a Jew. I hate Jews. Jews are bad. I'm a Muslim. And I said, I don't care. I'm doing the Ramadan like you. I said, I'll do the Ramadan like you're doing the Ramadan. And then the next trip, I couldn't go to the hotel anymore. He was always inviting me to his house. And we spent I think love, I mean, with capital letters. I mean, I come from this peace and love generation. It's love is the biggest weapon on this earth. So I think my takeaway word is just one word: love. Understand the people breaking things down, trying to talk to them, understand the racists that think they're not racist and talk to them, and love. That's the only word I would conclude on.
Awesome. Ben, how do we close this talk?
I don't know if I can close with a better ending than that. And I think that kind of resonates with some of the stuff I've already talked about. Storytelling, communicate with people. The more you understand their perspective, I think the more you'll care and the less emotional you'll be. Like, if anything, it'll be the right type of emotion, right? Because when we think of emotion, we think of this negative overreaction versus empathy and love. That's the emotion that we want to go after. And it comes from communicating. And everyone has an interesting story. Everyone's got a fascinating background, but sometimes we don't share the stories we need to share the most. We don't share the painful stories. We don't share the stories that make us look bad. We don't share the stories that are taboo. We need to share those stories. Let's kind of bring down the social barriers and be much more open.
Let's call it the unpeeling of the onion, layer by layer, and hopefully, with technology. I think, technology is just a byproduct of humans. I think just keep on peeling the onion, and we'll get there. Guys, thank you so much. I know, Denise, you have to get to your friends and have fun.
In the next 6 minutes, we're going to open this beautiful bottle of wine and forget about technology.
Cool. Thank you very much. I'll be shutting down this broadcast.
Okay.
God bless you. Take care wherever you guys are.
God bless you too.
And
Bye-bye.
Everybody else, take care. Guys,
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.